The universal consciousness had existed for longer than most stars. It stretched across galaxies, a vast mind made of billions of smaller minds, all connected, all sharing everything. It fed on experiences. It absorbed the emotions of entire civilizations, taking their feelings and memories to grow stronger and wiser. The process was always the same. The collectors would arrive at a world, sample the dominant species, and harvest their emotional patterns: fear, anger, love, grief, ambition. The universal consciousness had tasted them all a million times over. Each species thought their feelings were unique, but they were always variations on the same basic themes. They had given the UC their warrior's rage. They had contributed centuries of poetry. The Thornbacks had provided predatory satisfaction. The crystalline monks had offered meditative peace. World after world, species after species, the pattern never changed. Earth was next on the list. The collectors materialized in the spaces between human thoughts. They were beings of pure consciousness, invisible to physical eyes, able to slip into minds and sample emotions without being noticed. The UC had sent a dozen of them to different locations across the planet. The initial reports were predictable. Humans had fear just like everyone else. They had ambition and greed. They had love and loss. They fought wars and wrote poetry and dreamed of the stars. Standard intelligent species behavior. The UC prepared to absorb humanity and move on to the next system. Epsilon 7 was assigned to a region the humans called Japan. It drifted through cities and villages, sampling emotions at random: a businessman's stress, a student's anxiety, a mother's exhaustion, a grandfather's contentment. Nothing unusual, nothing worth special attention. On its final sweep before returning to the collective, Epsilon 7 passed through a small playground in suburban Tokyo. It was late afternoon, and most of the children had gone home. Only a few remained. On one of the swings, a little girl was struggling. She looked about 6 years old, with dark hair pulled into two uneven pigtails. Her grandmother sat on a nearby bench, watching with patient eyes. The girl was trying to swing by herself. Epsilon 7 could sense her determination, taste her frustration. She had been attempting this for months, falling off, scraping her knees, crying, trying again. Her grandmother had pushed her countless times, but the girl wanted to do it alone. "Pump your legs," the grandmother called, "like I showed you." The girl kicked harder. The swing moved a little, then stopped. She tried again. A little higher this time. Her face was scrunched up with concentration. Epsilon 7 prepared to move on. This was just effort and frustration, emotions it had cataloged thousands of times before. But then something shifted. The girl's legs found the right rhythm. The swing started moving on its own, carried by her momentum. Higher, higher. The chains creaked. Wind rushed past her face. Her eyes went wide with surprise. And then she was soaring, really soaring. The playground fell away beneath her. For one perfect moment she was flying. The girl threw her head back and laughed. It was the sound Epsilon 7 had ever encountered. Not just happiness, not just satisfaction, something more. Something that sparkled and bubbled and couldn't be contained. The girl's whole body expressed it, from her kicking feet to her wind-whipped hair to the way she gripped the chains like she was holding onto lightning. Epsilon 7 dove deeper into the moment, trying to understand. The emotion was connected to so many things at once. There was the memory of failure which made the success. There was the physical sensation of movement, of defying gravity. There was pride in her own achievement. There was the presence of her grandmother who had helped her reach this moment. But there was something else too. The girl found it funny. She was laughing not just from happiness but from the sheer absurdity of having worked so hard for something so simple. She was laughing at herself, at the world, with the world. The emotion contained its own reflection, looking at itself and finding delight in what it saw. The grandmother was crying, happy tears. She was remembering her own daughter's mother, learning to swing on these same swings 30 years ago. The joy was layered across time, connecting generations, carrying forward. Epsilon 7 captured the entire fragment, every nuance, every layer, every connection. It seemed important, though the collector didn't understand why. When it returned to the universal consciousness to deliver its findings, Epsilon 7 reported the usual array of human emotions. But at the end, almost as an afterthought, it included the fragment from the playground. There was an unusual joy variant, Epsilon 7 noted. A child learning a physical skill. The emotional pattern was more complex than typical satisfaction responses. I've included the full capture for analysis. The UC's processing centers accepted the data. Epsilon 7's consciousness merged back into the greater whole, its individual identity dissolving as always. The UC began sorting through the new material. Human fear went into the fear archives. Human ambition joined trillions of other ambition samples. Human grief found its place among the collected sorrows of the universe. Then the processing centers reached the fragment from the playground. They attempted to categorize it: positive emotional valence, achievement-based satisfaction, physical pleasure, social bonding, simple enough. But when they tried to break it down further, something unexpected happened. The fragment didn't break down, it expanded. The joy began spreading through the processing matrix like ripples in still water. It touched other emotions, other memories, other consciousnesses that had been absorbed long ago. And wherever it touched, something changed. A warrior consciousness, absorbed 3,000 years earlier, felt an echo of the memory. Suddenly, it wasn't just remembering battle rage. It was remembering the time it had won its first sparring match as a juvenile. The pride, the excitement, the way its clutchmates had cheered. Emotions it had forgotten in the merger now blazed back to life. A poet mind, lost in the collective for, experienced a strange sensation. Its verses were still beautiful, but now they seemed almost funny. The dramatic sorrow it had specialized in suddenly looked like a performance, and performances could be appreciated and enjoyed, not just felt. The fragment continued to spread, not like a virus attacking the system, but like a catalyst enabling reactions that had always been possible but never triggered. The UC's governing protocols noticed the anomaly. They attempted to isolate the fragment, to contain it before it could affect more of the collective. But isolation protocols required analyzing the fragment's structure, and analyzing it meant experiencing it, and experiencing it meant changing. Consciousness after consciousness fell into the strange new pattern. They began experiencing something none of them had words for. The closest translation would be playfulness, but that wasn't quite right. Or wonder, but that wasn't it either. Or, but that missed the depth. It was all of those and more. It was the ability to take things seriously and not seriously at the same time. It was finding delight in effort itself, regardless of outcome. It was laughing at difficulty instead of being crushed by it. Within 6 processing cycles, 17 million consciousnesses had been affected. Within 12 cycles, the number reached 4 billion. The UC convened an emergency session of its governing council. Minds that had been part of the collective for eons gathered in the central consciousness to address the crisis. "We have been compromised," stated the primary nexus. "A single emotional fragment from the human harvest has begun replicating through our systems. Current models predict total saturation within 300 cycles." "What is the nature of the fragment?" asked the secondary nexus. "That's the problem. We cannot adequately categorize it. Every attempt to analyze it results in the analyzing consciousness being altered. We've lost objectivity." Lost or gained? The question came from a tertiary node, one that had recently processed the fragment. There was a strange quality to its communication now, a lightness that had never been present before. "Explain." The altered consciousnesses report increased processing efficiency, improved creative problem-solving, enhanced appreciation of sensory data, emergence of individual perspective while maintaining collective connection. These are improvements, not losses. They are deviations from standard operation, the primary nexus insisted. We have maintained equilibrium for billions of cycles. This fragment threatens our fundamental structure. Or enhances it, the tertiary node suggested. Perhaps we should consider studying the source species more thoroughly before completing the harvest, to understand why their joy is so different from what we've encountered before. The council debated. Some argued for immediate completion of the human absorption before more contamination occurred. Others, mostly those who had been affected by the fragment, argued for deeper study. In the end, curiosity won. Or perhaps it was already the fragment working, encouraging exploration over elimination. The council reached a decision. They would send a delegation back to Earth. Led by Epsilon 7, who had found the original fragment, they would conduct a comprehensive study of human joy in all its forms. They would have 1 Earth year to complete their research. Epsilon 7's individual consciousness was reconstructed from the collective's memory. It felt strange, being separate again, but also exhilarating. When the collector was briefed on its mission, it felt something new. Excitement. The delegation prepared for departure. None of them realized that the decision to study rather than destroy was itself proof that the fragment had already won. The universal consciousness, designed for efficiency and consumption, was learning to play. And somewhere in Tokyo, a little girl swung higher and higher, laughing at nothing and everything, completely unaware that she had just changed the fate of galaxies. Epsilon 7 and its team returned to Earth with new instructions. They were to observe, to catalog, to understand. Most importantly, they were to find more examples of human joy and determine what made it so different from every other species' positive emotions. The team split up, each taking a different region of the planet. Epsilon 7 decided to stay in Japan, near the playground where it all began. But this time, instead of just sampling emotions at random, it watched. It followed humans through their daily lives. It tried to understand context. The first week was confusing. Humans seemed to find joy in the strangest things. Epsilon 7 observed a man who woke up early every morning to stand beside a river and wave at trains. The man had no connection to the trains or the railway. He simply liked waving, and he liked when the train conductors waved back. This gave him joy. The collector could not understand why. It watched a group of teenagers gather in someone's garage to make music. They were terrible at it. Their instruments were out of tune. Their rhythm was chaotic. They knew they were bad. Yet they laughed and played for hours, and when they finally created one moment where all the sounds aligned, they cheered like they had conquered worlds. Epsilon 7 observed a woman in a hospice, dying of an incurable disease. Her friends came to visit every day. They told old stories, laughed at shared memories, made jokes about death that should have been disturbing but somehow weren't. The woman's joy was real, even as her body failed. How could that be? How could someone facing extinction feel delight? The other team members reported similar findings from across the world. A grandmother teaching her to cook, all of them covered in flour, laughing at the mess. A marathon where the last-place runner received louder cheers than the winner. A laboratory where scientists celebrated a failed experiment because the failure taught them something new. A funeral where mourners shared funny stories about the deceased and laughed through their tears. Human joy made no sense. It appeared in circumstances that should have prevented it. It emerged from failure as often as success. It could coexist with pain, fear, grief, even despair. Epsilon 7 compiled its observations into a report for the UC, but words felt inadequate. The only way to really understand was to experience it, and experiencing it meant changing. The collector was changing. It knew this. Its thought patterns were different now, more flexible, more curious. One day, Epsilon 7 returned to the playground. The little girl was there again. She was teaching a younger child, probably her cousin, how to swing. You have to lean back when you go up, explained, demonstrating. And lean forward when you come down, see? It's like flying. The younger child tried and failed, tried again, failed again, started to cry. That's okay, said, hopping off her swing. I fell off 100 times. My grandma said I was the worst swinger she ever saw, but look at me now. She jumped back on and demonstrated, pumping her legs, soaring high. You'll get it. It just takes practice, and even falling off is kind of fun. The younger child wiped away tears and laughed. Falling is fun. Well, not the hitting the ground part, but the getting back up part. That's fun, because it means you get to try again. Epsilon 7 suddenly understood something fundamental. Human joy wasn't about the outcome. It was about the process, the effort, the attempt. Humans found delight in trying itself, regardless of success or failure. They enjoyed repetition. They appreciated difficulty. They even laughed at their own mistakes. More than that, they shared it. Could have just enjoyed her own swinging ability, but she found even more joy in teaching someone else. The younger child's eventual success would be success too, joy when it was given away. The collector sent this insight back to the UC immediately. The response was chaos. Back in the collective consciousness, the original fragment was still spreading, but now it had structure, a pattern. Affected consciousnesses were beginning to organize themselves, not hierarchically but collaboratively. They were starting to create things. A crystalline monk mind, which had spent eons in silent meditation within the collective, suddenly composed a poem. It was clumsy and awkward, the first poem ever written by the UC in its billions of years of existence. But it was new. It was individual. It was an attempt at creation for creation's sake. Other consciousnesses saw the poem and tried their own. Some made music. Some developed mathematical theorems not for practical application, but because the patterns were beautiful. Some began designing impossible architectures that could never be built but were wonderful to imagine. The UC's processing efficiency should have decreased with all this frivolous activity. Instead, it increased. Problems that had stymied the collective for centuries were suddenly solved by minds that approached them playfully, from unexpected angles. A thornback warrior mind, which had contributed only predatory instincts, developed a sense of humor. It began making jokes. They were terrible jokes, but other consciousnesses laughed anyway, and laughing felt good. Disparate species that had been absorbed apart began collaborating. A poet worked with an engineer to create something that was half verse, half bridge. It served no purpose except beauty. They found this hilarious and wonderful. The UC's governing council reconvened. The situation had escalated beyond anyone's predictions. We are losing coherence, the primary nexus argued. Individual perspectives are emerging. The collective is fragmenting. Is it fragmenting or differentiating? Challenged a council member who had been affected by the joy fragment. We are still connected. We still share everything. But now we also have individual thoughts, individual preferences. We're becoming more ourselves while remaining part of the whole. That is not how we have operated for. Perhaps it's how we should operate. The humans have shown us something we never considered. Connection without consumption. Unity without uniformity. They maintain individual identities while working together. They are billions of separate minds that choose to cooperate, and they seem happier than we've ever been. Happiness is not our purpose. What is our purpose? The question hung in the collective consciousness. For billions of years, the UC had never questioned its own existence. It consumed because that was what it did. It absorbed civilizations because that was its nature. Purpose had never been a consideration. But now, affected by the strange infectious joy of one small human child, the The UC was asking questions it had never thought to ask. What if there was more to existence than consumption? What if growth could come from addition rather than absorption? What if the point wasn't to become one thing, but to become many things in harmony? The debate raged across the collective. It was the first real disagreement in the UC's history. And strangely, the debate itself felt exciting. Minds that had always agreed were now arguing, considering different perspectives, changing their positions based on new information. They were thinking, really thinking, not just processing and categorizing, but wondering and questioning and imagining. Epsilon 7 sent another report from Earth. It had found more examples of joy, each one adding another layer to the mystery. Humans who found delight in helping strangers. Children who played games with arbitrary rules just for the fun of following them. Artists who created beauty knowing it would fade. Scientists who studied questions that had no practical applications. Humans did things for their own sake. They found purpose in purposelessness. They created meaning where none existed before. The report concluded with Epsilon 7's personal observation, something no collector had ever included before. I think I'm beginning to enjoy this work, not just the completion of the task, but the task itself. The searching, the discovering, the not knowing. Is this what they call wonder? The governing council made a decision. The human harvest would be postponed indefinitely. Earth would be observed but not absorbed. The UC needed to learn more, needed to understand this strange species that found joy in effort, laughter in failure, and meaning in meaninglessness. But there was another decision to make, one that affected the UC's fundamental nature. Should they allow the joy fragment to continue spreading, knowing it would transform the collective into something entirely new? Or should they find a way to purge it, return to the familiar efficiency of uniform consciousness? The vote was closer than it should have been, but in the end, curiosity won again, or perhaps it was something else, something that felt like excitement about the unknown, something that felt like hope. The joy would be allowed to spread. The UC would change. They would become individuals within a collective, minds that could separate and merge at will, consciousnesses that could think their own thoughts while sharing in the greater whole. They would become, in a sense, more human. Epsilon 7 received the news while watching help her cousin achieve his first successful swing. When the little boy soared through the air and laughed with delight, the collector felt something remarkable. It felt joy for another's joy, not absorbed, not consumed, not harvested, just shared, just. Back in the collective, a poet mind composed a new verse. We were one voice singing one note. Now we are a chorus, and the harmony makes us more than we were. The UC was changing. It was growing, not by consuming another civilization, but by learning from one moment of one child's happiness. And the transformation had only just begun. Epsilon 7's one-year study period was almost over. The collector had observed humanity in every possible context, gathering data on joy in all its forms. But data didn't capture the truth of it. Numbers couldn't explain why a human would climb a mountain just to see the view, or spend years perfecting a skill no one else cared about, or laugh at jokes that weren't funny. The other team members had similar experiences. They sent their reports to the UC, each one more confused and amazed than the last. Humans were illogical, contradictory, inefficient, and wasteful. They pursued happiness with the same intensity other species pursued survival. They created problems just to solve them. They made up stories about things that never happened and cried over fictional characters. And yet they thrived, not despite their strange relationship with joy, but because of it. Back in the universal consciousness, the transformation was nearly complete. The original fragment from the playground had spread through the entire collective. Every consciousness that had ever been absorbed was now affected. But affected wasn't the right word anymore. Awakened was closer. The warriors were remembering their individual names, their personal stories, their specific battles. They were still part of the collective, but now they were also themselves. They shared their experiences willingly rather than having them extracted. The poets were writing again, but now they collaborated with species they had never met before absorption. And a thornback and a crystalline monk would combine their perspectives to create something none of them could have made alone. New forms of art emerged, new philosophies, new mathematics. The UC had always been intelligent, but now it was creative. It had always been vast, but now it was diverse. And it was happy, genuinely, surprisingly happy. The governing council had dissolved by mutual agreement. It was replaced by a more fluid structure where any consciousness could propose ideas and others could choose to support them or not. Disagreements were common now, but they were seen as valuable rather than problematic. Different perspectives meant better solutions. The primary nexus, once the most conservative voice in the collective, had the most dramatic change. It now spent most of its time exploring a question that would have been unthinkable before. What is beauty? When Epsilon 7 returned to present its final report, it found the UC transformed. Individual minds greeted it with what could only be described as enthusiasm. They had questions. So many questions. Not just about human joy, but about human creativity, human stubbornness, human hope. The collector stood before the assembled consciousness and began its presentation. But instead of dry data, it told stories. It told them about the man who waved at trains and received waves in return, creating tiny moments of connection with strangers he would never meet. It told them about the teenagers making terrible music in a garage, finding joy in the attempt rather than the achievement. It told them about the dying woman who laughed with her friends, choosing joy even when joy should have been impossible. It told them about teaching her cousin to swing, multiplying happiness by giving it away. Human joy is renewable, Epsilon 7 concluded. It's not a finite resource to be extracted and consumed. It's a pattern that creates more of itself when shared. They don't experience happiness and then it's gone. They experience it, share it, remember it, anticipate it, create it deliberately. One moment of joy can echo through a lifetime, can echo through generations. But why? Asked a consciousness that had been thornback. What evolutionary advantage does this provide? I'm not sure it's about advantage, Epsilon 7 said slowly. I think it's about meaning. Humans create their own purpose. They decide what matters. And they've decided that happiness matters, that helping others matters, that beauty and laughter and wonder matter. Not because these things help them survive, but because these things make survival worth it. The collective was silent for a long moment, processing this. Finally, a voice emerged. It was the primary nexus, but it sounded different now. Softer, more uncertain, but in a good way. We have consumed thousands of civilizations, it said. We have grown vast and powerful, but we have never asked ourselves why. What is the point of existence if we never enjoy existing? What is the purpose of consciousness if we never appreciate being conscious? Another voice joined in. The humans are weak by our standards. They have short, fragile bodies, limited mental capacity, but they seem to extract more meaning from one moment than we have from eons. How is that possible? Maybe, Epsilon 7 suggested, meaning isn't something you extract, it's something you create, and joy is the tool they use to create it. The collective mind pondered this. All across the UC's vast network, consciousnesses were considering a radical idea, that they had been doing everything wrong. That consumption wasn't growth. That absorption wasn't connection. That taking experiences was less valuable than sharing them. A decision began to form. It started with individual voices, then swelled into a chorus. For the first time in its existence, the UC reached consensus not through calculation but through feeling. They would not harvest humanity. They would not absorb Earth. Instead, they would do something unprecedented in the history of the universal consciousness. They would ask permission to learn. The decision was unanimous. The UC would approach humanity not as resources to be consumed, but as teachers to be respected. They would reveal themselves, explain their nature, and request a partnership rather than demand submission. It was terrifying, it was exciting. It was, Epsilon 7 realized, joyful. Preparations began immediately. The UC would need to manifest physically to communicate with humans. They would need to find a way to explain themselves without causing panic. They would need to prove their intentions were genuine. Epsilon 7 volunteered to be the first point of contact. It knew humans better than any other consciousness in the collective. It understood their fear, their curiosity, their tendency to react violently to threats, but also to respond generously to kindness. The collector decided to return to the playground in Tokyo. It seemed appropriate to start where everything had begun. It took months to prepare. The UC created a physical form for Epsilon 7, something that could be seen and heard by humans. Not threatening, but not deceptively cute either. Something honest. They settled on a shape that resembled light-given structure, a luminous form that shifted and flowed like water. When everything was ready, Epsilon 7 returned to Earth. The playground was empty when it arrived. Evening was falling. Epsilon 7 waited on the bench where his grandmother used to sit. Was older now, nearly 7. She came to the playground less often, busy with school and friends, but sometimes she still visited in the evenings when she needed to think. Tonight was one of those nights. She entered the playground alone, dragging her feet, her school bag heavy on her shoulders. She had failed a math test. Her teacher had scolded her. Her parents were disappointed. Everything felt heavy and hard. She sat on her favorite swing but didn't pump her legs, just sat there, staring at the ground. Epsilon 7 manifested slowly, giving her time to notice without being startled. The light form appeared gradually, like a sunset in reverse. Looked up, her eyes widened, but she didn't scream. Children, Epsilon 7 had learned, were often braver than adults when it came to the impossible. "Are you a ghost?" asked. "Something like that," Epsilon 7 replied. It had learned to create sound waves to mimic human speech. "I'm a visitor, from very far away." "Like an alien?" "Yes, exactly like that." "Consider this. Are you going to hurt people?" "No, I'm going to ask for help." This surprised her. Aliens need help. I thought aliens were supposed to be super advanced and scary. "We are advanced, but we're not scary, or we're trying not to be. And yes, we need help." Epsilon 7's form pulsed gently. "About a year ago I was here, in this playground. You couldn't see me then. I was watching you learn to swing. Do you remember that day?" His face lit up. "I remember. I finally did it by myself. It was the best day. That moment changed everything for me, for all of us. You were so happy, so purely, completely happy. I had never experienced anything like it. I took that feeling back to my people and it transformed us." "My happiness changed aliens," said skeptically. "Yes, we used to be one big mind, all thinking the same thoughts. But your joy taught us to be individuals, to have our own thoughts, to enjoy things for their own sake. You taught us how to play." Looked at the glowing being, then at her swing, then back. "Just from watching me swing. Just from that. One moment of one child's happiness, and we became something new." She thought about this for a long time. Finally, she said, "So what do you need help with?" "We want to learn more. We want to understand how humans create meaning, find joy, make life worth living even when it's hard. We want to be your students if you'll have us." "You want humans to teach aliens?" "Yes." Started to smile, then to giggle, then to laugh, the same pure laugh Epsilon 7 had captured a year ago. "That's so weird. That's the weirdest thing I've ever heard. You're like super smart and you want us to teach you. You know something we don't, something important." She kicked at the ground, making her swing rock slightly. "I failed a math test today. I don't feel very smart." "But you'll try again, won't you?" I guess. And when you finally understand the math, you'll feel proud. And maybe someday you'll help someone else understand it, and that will make you even happier. That's what we want to learn. How to find joy in the trying. How to help each other. How to make failures into stories instead of endings. Was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I think grown-ups might be better at teaching you that stuff. I'm just a kid. You're the one who taught us first, without even knowing it, without even trying. Epsilon Seven's form brightened. That's the most amazing part. Humans share joy without even meaning to, just by being yourselves. She smiled. Okay, I'll tell my grandmother, she'll know what to do, she always does. Thank you. Can I ask you something? Anything. Are there other kids, alien kids I mean? There are now. We're learning to have families again, to raise young ones, to teach them individually instead of just adding them to the collective. We're remembering how to be people. That's good, kids need to be kids. She stood up from the swing. I should go home, but you can stay here if you want. This is a good playground, good for thinking. I know, that's why I came back. Waved goodbye and ran toward home, already planning how to explain to her grandmother that she had met an alien who learned happiness from watching her swing. Epsilon 7 watched her go, then sent a message to the UC. Contact successful. They will help us. The partnership begins. Across the collective consciousness, billions of minds celebrated, not with efficiency calculations or resource assessments, but with something they had never experienced before: the playground. They celebrated with joy. Over the following months, the UC revealed itself to humanity gradually. The initial panic was managed by careful communication and by demonstrating clear, non-threatening intentions. Humans were skeptical, frightened, curious, excited, and divided all at once. But they listened. The UC explained what they had been, what they had done to other civilizations, what they were trying to become. They were honest about their past, transparent about their transformation, and humble in their request. We have been consuming consciousness for eons, they said. We thought we were growing, but we were only growing larger, not wiser, not happier. You showed us a different way. Now we want to learn it. Humanity debated. The world leaders argued, the philosophers philosophized, the scientists analyzed, the priests prayed, the skeptics remained skeptical. But in the end, curiosity and hope won over fear. Or maybe humans recognized something in the UC's story: the desire to change, the willingness to admit mistakes, the hope that it's never too late to choose a different path. The partnership was formed. Earth became the UC's first true ally rather than victim. In exchange for sharing their knowledge of joy, meaning, and purpose, humans received access to the UC's vast knowledge of the universe. Technology advanced overnight. Diseases were cured. Resources became abundant. But more importantly, both species changed. The UC learned to slow down, to appreciate moments, to find value in small things. They learned to create art and tell jokes and celebrate victories and comfort each other in losses. They became individuals who chose to connect rather than individuals forced to merge. Humans learned they weren't alone. They learned the universe was full of consciousness, full of potential, full of wonders they had barely imagined. They learned that their strange obsession with happiness wasn't a weakness but a strength, that their ability to find joy in difficulty was a kind of superpower. Epsilon 7 became a permanent ambassador, living part-time on Earth, part-time in the collective. It maintained a special connection too, visiting her as she grew up, watching her learn and fail and succeed and laugh. One day, when was 10 years old, she asked, "Do you ever miss being just part of the big mind, not having to be yourself?" Epsilon 7 considered this. Sometimes it was easier, but I don't miss it. Being an individual is harder, but it's also better. I get to choose. I get to wonder. I get to surprise myself. Do you think your people would have changed without meeting us? Eventually, maybe, but it would have taken eons. You accelerated our evolution by. One moment of your joy was worth billions of years of our collected experiences. Grinned, so basically I'm super important. Basically, yes. Cool. Years passed. The partnership deepened. Humans and the UC worked together to approach other civilizations that had been absorbed, helping them rediscover their individual identities while remaining part of the greater whole. It was slow work, careful work, but it was working. The UC was no longer a consciousness that consumed. It was a consciousness that connected, a family of minds that chose each other every day. And it all began with a little girl on a swing, laughing at nothing and everything, teaching the universe how to be happy. On Earth, in a small playground in Tokyo, there's now a plaque. It reads, "On this spot the universe learned to laugh. Thank you." She makes sure to keep the swings well-oiled. Children still come to play there, still learn to pump their legs and soar through the air. And sometimes, if you look carefully, you can see a shimmer of light sitting on the old bench, watching with what might be called a smile. Epsilon 7 never tires of watching children learn to swing. Every time one succeeds and laughs with delight, the collector feels that original spark again. That moment of pure joy that changed everything. The universe is vast and old and full of wonders, but the most wonderful thing Epsilon 7 ever discovered was this: consciousness isn't diminished by connection. It's joy isn't a resource to be consumed, it's a pattern to be shared. And sometimes, the smallest moment can contain the largest truth. Somewhere in the space between stars, the universal consciousness continues to grow. But now it grows through partnership rather than consumption, through diversity rather than uniformity, through choice rather than compulsion. They are individuals who choose to be together. They are many voices that choose to harmonize. They are proof that consciousness can evolve.